A crucial $500,000 order for bolts from a major client was abruptly canceled. The day before the building's completion deadline, my business partner Ashley dropped a bombshell. Canceled? But the bolts are already installed in the building. What are we supposed to do now? It can't be helped since it's canceled. It's up to you to figure out what to do from here on out. I couldn't hold back my anger at her words. At this point, trying to reason with her would be a waste of time. I glared at Ashley and let out a deep sigh. If it's canceled, there's nothing we can do about it. While Ashley looked smugly pleased, I started plotting my next move. She must have some ulterior motive behind this. I swear I'll expose her scheme and make her regret it. I'm Jessica Miller, a 54-year-old CEO of Miller Fastener Manufacturer. I studied engineering in college and joined my father's company right after graduation. When my father was still active, I focused on bolt production but also got involved in product development. Working in an environment where I could concentrate on developing bolts every day was fulfilling. However, my father, the former CEO, passed away a year ago. When he was alive, my father often spoke about his dream of having our bolts used in products worldwide, especially in airplanes and rockets. Wanting to make his dream come true, I decided to take over the company. Currently, we're gradually developing bolts that can withstand the rigors of space development projects. More companies are sympathizing with our sincere approach to work, and we're starting to get more projects. In particular, we've been fortunate to work with Jacobs Construction Company, a major player in the industry. Thanks to them, we've been able to supply bolts for world-renowned buildings. However, there's someone at Jacobs Construction Company that I struggle to get along with. That person is Ashley Smith, the head of their construction management department. Despite being only 35, she's already a department head and is rumored to be highly capable. Although she seems to be highly regarded within the company, I just can't stand her. Her scheduling never takes subcontractors' circumstances into consideration, and she's prone to threatening outbursts. Everything about her is the opposite of my personality, and I couldn't accept it. Our company is currently working on manufacturing bolts for a high-rise office building that Jacobs Construction Company is constructing in the city. Daniel, the head of Jacobs Construction Company's materials procurement department, recognized the quality of our bolts, which led to us getting this project. Daniel is extremely level-headed, always offering encouraging words even when development hits setbacks. He's someone I can really trust. This time, we're trying to develop bolts that are perfect for this earthquake-prone region. Daniel assured me that we still have time until the deadline, so we shouldn't rush things. But then, the unthinkable happened. Jessica, the deadline for the bolts has been moved up. Please have them ready by next Friday. What? I was told the deadline was the 15th of next month. If it's next Friday, I can't guarantee the quality. Suddenly, Ashley's voice turned menacing as she began to threaten me. Huh? You're just a subcontractor, so why are you talking back? Your small company would go under without our orders, right? Shut up and do as you're told. I was stunned by Ashley's abrupt change in demeanor. But Daniel told me the deadline was the 15th of next month. Perhaps mentioning Daniel's name was a mistake. Ashley let out a big sigh. As I said, Daniel is in materials procurement. Once they secure the materials, their job is done. From here on out, it's my responsibility as head of construction management. Got it? In other words, you just need to do as I say. Understand? Good, I'll be expecting the bolts by next Friday then. She hung up after her one-sided rant. This was a big problem. There's no way we can make the deadline by next Friday. But if we don't deliver? If the former CEO were still around, he might have told me not to do business with a company like that. But now, I'm a CEO responsible for protecting my employees' livelihoods. I can't just easily break off the contract. I gathered my employees, explained the situation, and somehow managed to meet the Friday deadline. On delivery day, Ashley and Daniel were both present. Daniel looked apologetic the whole time, but Ashley had a triumphant expression on her face. See? I knew you could do it. Since we moved up the deadline, I'm sure you were able to save on labor costs and reduce expenses, right? Could you revise the invoice with a new amount and resubmit it? I was completely baffled by what she was saying, unable to hide my confusion. What? What do you mean? I'm saying, since the delivery was moved up by 10 days, you must have been able to cut down on labor and utility costs. So, the invoiced amount should change, too. I'm telling you to give me an invoice with a lower amount. Do you understand? Maybe it's too hard for a small company like yours to grasp? Ashley's reasoning was so unreasonable that I couldn't keep up with her. Even if you say that, we had to push our employees to work overtime and on holidays. If anything, it wasn't enough. I won't change the invoiced amount. We had submitted an estimate at the beginning, and they had already approved it. I've never heard of changing an invoice after delivery, especially when the request comes from the client and not us. Oh my. Your father, the former CEO, was much more flexible, but I guess you're not like him. It's only a matter of time before your company goes under. This is why women are looked down upon in this industry. What a pain! Maybe it would have been better if the company had ended with your father's generation. Even if she says that, I can't change the amount on the invoice. What more does she want us to do? And Ashley is a woman too. She doesn't seem to realize that this has turned into the worst possible situation where a woman is hurting another woman. Left with no choice, I reluctantly revised the invoice with an amount that was barely above the break-even point and handed it to Ashley. See? You can do it if you try. You should have just done it quickly without complaining. Well then, I'll be counting on you for the next project too. You barely managed to scrape by this time. If you had refused, there wouldn't have been a next time. Ashley said as she took the invoice with a refreshed expression, offering no words of gratitude for our painful decision. Daniel didn't even try to follow up and just kept his head down the whole time. He's usually such a sincere and dedicated worker, so why is he so timid when it comes to Ashley? This job left me with a lot of frustration and unanswered questions, but now that we've delivered, all that's left is to wait for the construction company to finish the building. I convinced myself that it was still worthwhile to be involved in a facility that supports the economy and decided to forget about this incident. However, a few days later, something even more shocking happened at the very end. After the delivery, we had started working on another project. Still, rumors about the high-rise construction would reach us from time to time. It seemed that Ashley was still doing whatever she pleased, and subcontractors had a poor opinion of her. Since we had already finished our part, I didn't think too deeply about it when I heard these things. But then one day, we received a call. Oh, Jessica. It's been a while. How are you? I hate to ask, but could you come to our company right now? It's hard to discuss this over the phone. Hearing those words, I had a bad feeling. It had been quite some time since the delivery, and we weren't currently doing business with Jacob's construction company. So why were they calling me in? Filled with unease, I headed to Jacob's construction company. You're late. What were you doing? Ashley's first words were too harsh, especially considering she had suddenly summoned me. What did you want to discuss? With a nasty look on her face, Ashley nonchalantly stated with confidence. We're canceling the order for $500,000 worth of bolts from your company. I was so stunned by her words that I couldn't respond for a while. It was the day before the building's completion deadline, so this was completely out of the blue. Cancelled? But the bolts are already installed in the building. What are we supposed to do now? It can't be helped since it's cancelled. It's up to you to figure out what to do from here on out. Tomorrow's the completion deadline, but we're changing the schedule, so figure something out by tomorrow. Even I couldn't hold back my anger at her words. Continuing this conversation would surely be pointless. I glared at Ashley and let out a deep sigh. If it's cancelled, there's nothing we can do about it. While Ashley looked smugly pleased, I started plotting my next move. She must have some ulterior motive behind this. I swear I'll expose her scheme and make her regret it. I won't let her get away with this. I hurried back to my office and called every construction-related company and demolition contractor I knew. Many of them had not had a good experience with Jacob's construction company on this project, so most of them sympathized with me. I explained my plan to them, and they quickly got to work. We only had one day. Since it was a $50,000 cancellation, I decided to make sure I'd collect that amount. I'm going to remove the $50,000 worth of bolts. I'm sorry for the inconvenience, everyone, but please bear with me. As I said this, all the gathered stakeholders one after another reassured me not to worry. As expected of the true professionals in this field, they are made different. They carefully removed the main bolts while paying close attention to safety. After removing all the $50,000 worth of bolts, I went to report to Ashley. I removed the bolts. We won't be doing business with your company in the future. Thank you for everything up until now. So you removed them all? That's a relief. If you don't do business with us, won't you go bankrupt? Will you be okay? Also, make sure to transfer the refund here soon. Ashley said, looking quite at ease, but there was one thing that bothered me. By the way, what are you going to do about the parts where the bolts were removed? Don't tell me you're going to leave it as is. Are you okay? It's obvious that it'll collapse right away if you leave it like that. I found cheaper and better bolts, so I canceled the order. Transfer the refund directly to that vendor. Bolts that are cheaper and better than ours. I can't believe such bolts exist in this world. Moreover, it's strange to transfer the refund to that vendor instead of Jacob's construction company. Feeling doubtful, I asked Ashley. I see. That's good to hear. By the way, which company's product is it? I'd like to know for future reference. And is it okay to not transfer the money to Jacob's construction company? Hearing that, Ashley made a slightly puzzled face, but then started talking with a triumphant expression. They're bolts from the neighboring country. They're half the price of your company's bolts, but the durability is very high. It really helped me out. But don't tell anyone about this. You understand, right? It's a corporate secret. I had a bad feeling somehow, but since we did everything we could, I decided to leave it as is. Considering the costs incurred for collecting the $50,000 cancellation, it's quite a deficit, but this is a good experience. I forcibly convinced myself that I won't make such a mistake again. I vowed in my heart to never do business with Jacob's construction company again. Then, a month later, for some reason, our company was also invited to the completion ceremony celebrating the building's construction. Why us? I wondered, but I understood it was because some types of bolts were left as is, so I decided to attend as well. However, something surprising happened there. As the guests entered the building after the completion ceremony, I heard a faint sound. It was a sound I had heard several times before, and from experience, I had a bad feeling. Ashley was chatting with two men. One was Mr. Jacobs, the president of Jacobs Construction Company, and the other was probably the building's owner. Ashley had an expression I'd never seen before, happily talking with the two and not seeming to notice this unpleasant sound. I felt like I should hurry and leave the building, so I rushed towards the exit. Suddenly, the floor began to shake. I heard someone shout "earthquake" from afar. I quickly protected my head with my bag and crouched down. The staff were shouting that this building was earthquake resistant, so there was no need to worry. Despite that, suddenly some walls peeled off and the steel frame bent. For the steel frame to bend, it must be a fairly large earthquake. The site fell into chaos and everyone hurried to exit the building. But when I got outside, nothing seemed to have changed. No earthquake warning sounded, only a news flash was issued. I couldn't help but wonder why this happened when the steel frame couldn't possibly bend from such a small earthquake. Then I spotted Ashley in the distance, her face pale. Ashley's expression bothered me, but I decided it was strange for me to be concerned about it and returned to the company. The disastrous completion ceremony was a big topic on the evening news. I was surprised to hear on the news that Jacobs Construction Company would be inspecting the building's structure again, realizing it was no trivial matter. Then, 2 weeks later, I was suddenly summoned to Jacobs Construction Company for some reason. They said they wanted to talk to me about this construction incident, but something didn't sit right. Our company just accepted the $50,000 cancellation and complied with it. I reported it to Ashley too. Most of our bolts weren't even used, so why? With those thoughts in mind, I headed to Jacobs Construction Company. I arrived at the office and was ushered into the conference room. President Jacobs, Ashley, Daniel, and the building inspectors are all there waiting for me.
Jessica, what in the world is going on here?
President Jacobs asks, with disappointment written all over his face.
What do you mean? What's going on?
Apparently, the investigation found that the problem was with the bolts we supplied. Can you believe that? Ashley's sitting next to me, looking at me with terrified eyes. Her expression is practically screaming at me not to say anything unnecessary.
Jessica, is it possible that when you rush the bolt delivery, you compromise their durability? The bolts connecting the main steel frame were extremely weak, and it seems that was the cause of this accident.
I understand the gist of it. But even if they say that, those bolts they used weren't ours, so there's no point in telling me this. Still, Ashley keeps glaring at me, eyes demanding that I absolutely do not say a word. I ignored Ashley's gaze.
Even if you say that, we carefully removed $500,000 worth of bolts that were canceled.
Everyone except Ashley was shocked when I said this.
Canceled? What do you mean by that? Ashley told me that she was able to purchase bolts of the same strength for a cheaper price in the neighboring country, so she asked me to cancel the order. The bolts were already installed, so I was concerned, but I removed the $500,000 worth as instructed. I already reported this to Ashley. Suddenly, Ashley starts yelling denials at the top of her lungs. Hey, do you have some kind of compulsive lying disorder? Stop joking around. Do you have some kind of grudge against me or what?
I didn't have any grudge against her before, but after working with Ashley this time, I was fed up with her selfishness. From rushing the delivery date to reducing the invoice amount and canceling the order. And now to say the responsibility lies with our bolts, I can't just stay quiet and listen to this anymore.
If you find it hard to believe, I have evidence.
What would you like to do?
What evidence?
Sweat starts pouring out of Ashley. Ignoring Ashley, I begin recounting the events in chronological order. About moving up the delivery date. Being told to discount the invoice amount. Up to this point, Daniel was with us too, so the explanation went quickly. And finally, the matter of canceling the $500,000 worth of bolts.
There are no witnesses for that part, right? Why are you lying? Do people develop compulsive lying disorders as they get older too? Gosh, I really don't want to get old.
She says it jokingly, but sweat is streaming down Ashley's forehead.
I thought that might be the case, so I recorded it.
I start playing the audio. Ashley suddenly stands up and comes charging at me.
Stop that right now!
Seeing how flustered she is, President Jacobs and Daniel seem to realize that this is the truth.
Ashley, what is the meaning of this?
Ashley's panicking.
What do you mean? What's the meaning?
There's no record of this in the accounting reports or construction management documents.
What exactly is going on?
You need to explain this properly. The bolt strength revealed in this investigation was less than half as strong as the bolts from Jessica's company. You need to clearly explain this too. If it's not in the accounting report, then where did the money she made us reduce from our estimate and the $500,000 we refunded for the canceled order go? The president strongly consults her, but Ashley keeps playing dumb. Then Daniel suddenly starts talking. I honestly had no expectations that anything Daniel said would be useful, since he can never speak up strongly against Ashley.
Actually, I saw Ashley in the entertainment district the other day.
Everyone looks at Daniel quizzically, as this is completely unrelated to the current topic.
I found it strange, so I did a little digging. Ashley, you have a considerable amount of debt to a certain man, don't you?
It was immediately clear how flustered Ashley became.
What are you talking about? There's no way. Why would I have debt?
I wanted it to be a lie too, but I was able to hear a bit about it. And then this incident happened. I just thought that maybe Ashley needed money. It's fine if that's not the case, but the company's money flow is clearly suspicious. Suddenly, Ashley glares at Daniel and starts yelling.
Hey, are you in any position to talk? You were the one who made a pass at me, weren't you? I'll sue you for that. You're a disgusting married man.
This again? I only meant to shake your hand to encourage each other after we both became department heads. I'm very sorry. If you'd like, let's have the company decide if that incident warrants punishment too. I'm surprised to see Daniel suddenly being so assertive. Ashley can only glare at Daniel in frustration, unable to do anything else. I also couldn't speak strongly to Ashley because of this. It'd be a hassle to get sued, after all. But that was a mistake. I never imagined such a huge fraud would occur. It would definitely be troubling to be sued for just a handshake, claiming it was a come-on. I finally understand Daniel's attitude towards Ashley up until now. No longer able to make excuses, Ashley reluctantly starts talking, seemingly resigned.
I fell for a man and was desperate to make him like me. Then the debt just kept increasing. At first I sold my belongings and dipped into my savings, but that wasn't enough.
When Ashley was struggling to come up with money, she met me and thought she could fool me. The initial invoice reduction went better than expected, so she desperately searched for a cheap bolt supplier. The person at that bolt company told her they could make bolts of the same strength, so she had them deliver for $200,000 and pocketed the $300,000 difference. That's the truth of the matter. I sent $500,000 to that bolt company, and $300,000 of that apparently went to Ashley. I should have thoroughly checked back then, but it was already too late. Ashley embezzled a total of about $350,000. But when she felt the shaking from that small earthquake, she instantly realized it was because of the bolts. And that she had been deceived. But Ashley herself didn't know what to do anymore either. So she kept quiet about the truth and blamed it on our bolts. We were all stunned into silence for a while at this unbelievable situation. Finally, President Jacobs manages to start talking. "Ashley, you'll be going to the police. Be prepared for that." Ashley looks surprised at President Jacobs' words, seeming to have not considered that possibility.
The police? Why me?
Embezzlement, fraud. It was all done by you alone. I'm sorry, but you'll have to take responsibility. And I'll likely have to take responsibility too. I had high hopes for you, but it seems I misjudged you. I'm truly disappointed. President Jacobs says that and calls the police. Ashley hangs her head, unable to move, seemingly having never thought it would become this serious. She can only repeatedly apologize in a small voice. This incident gets widely reported on the news, and President Jacobs also resigns to take responsibility. The court deems Ashley's embezzlement to be malicious in nature and hands down a sentence. Even if she comes back, working in the construction industry will be impossible, and with how big of a news this became, she'll likely never be able to get a job she wants again. It's Ashley's own responsibility, but the aftertaste is so bad I'm at a loss for words. As for me, I'm surprised to receive unexpected attention from this incident. On a certain news program, they investigated what would have happened if we had continued using our bolts. The results proved what I already knew, that our bolt quality is at the highest global standard, and our company started getting attention. Our name recognition gradually increased, and I also got opportunities to be interviewed several times. Ironically, the fact that a woman runs a bolt company also became a point of intrigue for the public. And amazingly, I was able to get an offer from an aviation industry. Right now we're still in the prototyping stage, but the research I had been secretly doing on increasing bolt strength is proving to be useful. It almost feels like my father is cheering me on. What I learned from this incident is to not get too absorbed in something and lose sight of myself. I especially felt that way regarding money. And to cherish my connections with people. Until now, many people have helped me in various ways. I'm grateful for each and every one of them, and going forward, I want to continue to seriously engage in this work to make my father's dream a reality. Arya placed instant ramen in front of me. There's only enough for the family. I couldn't understand what Arya was saying. Should I head home? Kevin said just that and started towards the entrance. Yes. I also stood up and followed Kevin. I'm sorry for everything that happened. Like emotions bursting out, I told Kevin everything up to now. How Arya had suddenly changed her attitude towards me. My name is Harper. I'm a 56-year-old housewife. My husband's name is Kevin. Kevin and I worked at the same company. It was what you'd call an office romance. I was in accounting, and Kevin was in sales, different departments, but he would often come to accounting. Kevin used to distribute souvenirs from his business trips to the accounting department. Kevin was thoughtful and kind. Whenever I had to go to the sales department for receipt verification, Kevin was the first to help. Even when it wasn't his fault, Kevin would always apologize. His handling was sincere, and his smile was kind. I was secretly attracted to him, but too embarrassed to make the first move, so we continued as colleagues for a while. Then, one time, it came to light that one of the employees was falsifying receipt processing. Kevin cooperated with the accounting department, worked hard to uncover the truth, and when it was resolved, he invited me to a dinner under the pretense of a consolation party. I thought it would be a group outing, but it was just Kevin and me. I was surprised, but more so delighted. Dinner with Kevin was so enjoyable that I lost track of time. We shared a hobby, or rather a way of thinking, like finding it fun when the numbers in the ledger matched perfectly. After that, we went out to eat several times, and went on dates. After about 6 months of this, Kevin proposed to me. I pretended to think about it, but was extremely happy. I tried to keep him in suspense for about a week, but my happiness got the better of me, and I said yes the next day. Kevin has been very kind since we first met. That hasn't changed, even now that we're married. He always thinks of me. He makes sure we have quality time together as a couple. I consider myself very lucky to be married to Kevin. I continued working after we got married, but I quit when I got pregnant with our eldest son, Brian. Brian's birth was difficult. He was breech. Kevin was told by the doctor that it could endanger either of our lives. Despite this, we doted on Brian when he was born. Brian was a mischief maker, leaving the house covered in doodles, dismantling toys quickly. Still, we didn't scold him and let him grow up freely. Because of the risks associated with pregnancy and childbirth, Kevin and I decided that Brian would be our only child. For that reason, Brian was our precious treasure. In kindergarten and early elementary school, he was so free-spirited that he caused his teachers quite a bit of trouble. We were cautioned at numerous parent-teacher conferences. However, as he moved into the upper grades of elementary school, he seemed to gain some discretion, and his behavior improved. From then on, Brian was quite the honor student. He had good grades and served as the president of the student council. He was also a leader in his club. His test scores never fell below 90. However, at home, Brian didn't seem to study much. When I peeked into his room, Brian was usually lying down reading manga. When I asked, "Brian, while reading manga, are you studying?" "Yeah," he would always say. Yet Brian never let his grades slip. He must have been working hard in ways I didn't know. Brian went on to a public junior high and high school. Despite his grades, he chose the public school closest to our home, though he could have gone to a prestigious private school. Even in junior high and high school, his grades were always at the top, and he was the student council president. He went to a local public university for college. In college, he seemed more devoted to activities like volunteering than to his studies. Then, when he started job hunting, Brian only applied to local companies. With his grades, he could have worked for a large corporation or a foreign company. I was puzzled why Brian chose such small companies. I asked Brian why. "Since high school, I kind of always wanted to work locally." Apparently, there was a class assignment about the local area in high school that sparked his interest in staying local. He chose the local university and through volunteer activities sought to deepen his understanding of our town. I hadn't realized Brian had been thinking along these lines and honestly admired it. "That's impressive. You really thought it through." I praised Brian. "It's not a big deal," Brian said, laughing shyly. Brian got the job he wanted at a local company and graduated from university without issue. I thought he would commute from our house, but he decided to rent an apartment near his company. Brian is very strong and likes to show his independence. "It's all experience," he said. He wanted to experience living on his own and learn how difficult housework can be. Our home became quiet as if a light had gone out after Brian left. But then I remembered, this is how it was when Kevin and I first got married. I decided to enjoy living just with Kevin again. Thanks to Brian choosing public schools, we had quite a bit of savings left. The mortgage on our house was almost paid off, so it looked like we could pay it off around the time Kevin retires. Furthermore, my parents have a broad apartment management business. Eventually, it looks like I will take over the apartment management. We won't have any financial troubles in our old age. Brian's apartment was close enough that he could come and go by bicycle, so he often came home. Thanks to that, I never felt lonely. After a few years of this peaceful life, Brian said, "I have someone I want you to meet." It was when he was 26. Brian brought that woman home. "Let me introduce you. This is Aria." Brian and Aria worked at the same company, and she was in the accounting department. Hearing that, Kevin and I exchanged looks and laughed. Brian and Aria looked at us curiously. Kevin started telling our story with a laugh. Listening to us, Brian and Aria looked at each other and laughed too. Aria was petite, with eyes that drooped down when she laughed, giving her a very cute and kind impression. Aria seemed restless, looking around our home. Her actions reminded me of a little bird looking around, which was charming. Kevin and I liked Aria right away. If only we had been suspicious at that moment. The trouble that followed might have been avoided. There was a hidden reason why Aria was looking around our home. Kevin and I failed to notice it. "Nice to meet you." Aria's voice was very pleasant, and I thought Brian was lucky to have her. Aria was a good listener, and even the usually quiet Brian seemed happy talking with her. The four of us had dinner together and enjoyed a pleasant time. After Aria and Brian left, Kevin and I were relieved and happy that Brian had chosen a good partner. I felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. Brian and Aria's relationship progressed smoothly, and they decided to get married. They had their wedding at a local venue and were blessed by everyone. Kevin and I were so happy. That day became one of the most memorable in our lives. However, we couldn't have imagined that from here, our lives would start to spiral downwards, with misfortune hitting Kevin and me. At first, we thought it was coincidence or maybe Aria wasn't feeling well, but it didn't seem to be the case. Her attitude towards me got worse day by day. When I tried to discuss what to have for dinner with Aria, at first, she pretended not to hear. The next thing she would say was usually, "What?" in an annoyed tone. I was taken aback by Aria's attitude. "I was wondering what to have for dinner." Aria's replies were always cold. "Oh, whatever is fine. Harper, you decide." The atmosphere wasn't conducive to discussion at all. Aria's attitude had clearly changed since we first met. And it was only towards me. Instead of getting angry, I was more confused. I didn't want to ruin my relationship with Aria, so I ended up being more submissive than necessary. "Then how about beef stew for dinner today?" Aria replied with an air of inconvenience. "That's fine, I guess," and cut off the conversation with me. I immediately started preparing the beef stew. Then Aria, without offering to help, would always mutter to herself with comments like, "What about the ingredients, the spices?" I ignored her words and silently continued cooking. While cooking, I wondered if I had done something terrible to Aria. But I couldn't think of anything. Did I say something unpleasant to her? Did I do something to offend her? I tried desperately to remember. But nothing came to mind. Honestly, I had no idea why she was acting this way. Aria's attitude didn't improve after that. Every time Aria treated me badly, I wondered if I had done something to her. However, I couldn't understand why Aria was treating me so badly. I felt like the reason for Aria's change in attitude wasn't me, but something else. This was just a feeling, without any certainty. A year passed, and Aria's attitude towards me remained unchanged. In fact, it got even worse. "Harper, this food looks disgusting." Aria began to openly criticize my cooking. Unlike before, she now blatantly insulted it.
Doesn't the seasoning seem too strong, and doesn't it look unappetizing?
I couldn't help but talk back. We always eat this at home. Arya responded to my words with a mocking laugh.
Is that so that's lame?
I was honestly quite irritated by Arya's attitude.
If you're going to complain that much, next time you can cook by yourself. Scary! Harper, you're scary!
Arya exaggerated her fear in a loud voice. Probably so that Kevin and Brian in the living room could hear. I was scared of this calculating side of Arya. Anyway, Arya's attitude was only visible when it was just the two of us. She kept making provocative comments to me. I thought many times about discussing it with Kevin or Brian. But I just couldn't bring myself to do it. Arya was very devoted to Kevin. She also got along well with Brian. So I thought I just had to endure it. I didn't want to ruin the relationship.
Tonight's dinner is a gilo made by Harper.
Arya served the dish with a huge smile. Knowing the Arya from the kitchen, all I could do was give a wry smile. Kevin sat down, saying,
"That looks delicious."
Brian also smiled.
Harper can cook delicious meals, and she's good at laundry and cleaning. I really admire her.
Arya turned to me with a smile. Honestly, I felt sick.
Harper, you're really amazing.
The two who didn't know the face Arya hid behind her smile looked at her fondly. Thank you. I returned a smile as if to keep up appearances. Anyone who didn't know would notice my expression was forced. If they saw Arya's smile, they wouldn't think she treated me badly. I feared being called a liar by Kevin and Brian. I thought if I kept enduring without consulting anyone, Arya's attitude might change. However, Arya's harsh words and attitude towards me never ceased. Arya continued to complain about the food I made. But she never did anything herself. And the cleanup too. And she would quickly complain about anything even slightly dissatisfying. One day, Arya threw unbearable words at me.
Harper, are you sane with that seasoning?
I couldn't endure it and snapped back at her.
Do you have a problem?
Arya pretended to be shocked as usual.
No, I don't. Scary.
What do you mean by that? Stop belittling me already. Arya seemed slightly taken aback by my earnest gaze. I'm not belittling you, she muttered, biting her lip and glaring at me. It's always truly unpleasant with you, I continued.
Shut up! A woman like you!
It was as if Arya's mask had slipped. Her face contorted uglily all of a sudden.
Being treated roughly is just about right for you.
Arya continued to berate me. Towards me, Arya said,
You're really pathetic. Ugly face and nasty personality. The idea of you being a MIL is unbelievable.
Her insults were relentless. To belittle me to this extent must mean she really dislikes me. But still, I can't understand how she can say such horrible things to someone she dislikes. If she dislikes me that much, I think she should just stay away and keep her distance. I felt sad. It's sad that you think that way. Arya raised her voice in a semblance of panic.
No, I really can't take this anymore. Hey, are you okay?
Kevin called out from the living room. Arya's loud voice had reached the living room.
I heard a loud voice.
Brian came into the kitchen. Brian came from the living room to check on Arya and me arguing. Seeing Brian's face, Arya seemed to regain her composure. Sorry, there was a cockroach. I went along with Arya's act.
Yes, that's right. Sorry for making a fuss,
Arya said. We've dealt with the cockroach, so it's fine now. And pushed Brian back towards the living room. Brian said,
Okay.
and went back to the living room. Neither Arya nor I wanted to involve Brian and Kevin. This was a problem between Arya and me. Our relationship did not change after that. An unpleasant atmosphere continued to linger between us. However, about half a year later, happy news came to Brian's family. Brian and Arya were expecting a child. I hoped this would change my relationship with Arya. Arya, being cautious with her pregnancy, reduced her visits to our home. For a while, I regained a peaceful daily life. During Arya's absence, I kept thinking about why she changed her attitude towards me. I could think of nothing. There was one thing that bothered me, but could that really be the reason for her attitude? Dismissing it as impossible, I shook my head and went shopping. When Arya entered her stable period, Arya and Brian came to visit our house. I thought that having a child would calm Arya down. But that was wishful thinking. Upon seeing me, Arya resumed her terrible attitude. Different from Harper, it's growing well. I told Arya. Take care of yourself and rest on the sofa. But Arya showered me with harsh words. No thanks. Who knows what you'd cook if I left it to you? Furthermore, I need to keep an eye on you. Arya said. What does she mean by keep an eye? So, this is how Arya sees me. You can talk back, but I'm fine with anything said by you who could only have one child. I responded calmly. Oh, is that so? But inside, I was far from calm. I felt guilty for not being able to give Brian siblings. I harbored a sense of apology towards Brian in my heart. I poured love into Brian and had more time to engage with him. Kevin and I were able to lead a relaxed life. I had no regrets about that. As I fell silent, Arya continued to taunt me. That reaction can't even talk back. Pathetic. I didn't understand what Arya wanted or why she was doing this. Feeling it was futile to engage any further, I ignored Arya. A few months later, Brian and Arya's healthy baby girl was born. For Kevin and me, she was our first granddaughter. We were incredibly happy. We eagerly awaited the day we could meet our first granddaughter. I hoped that having a child would improve my relationship with Arya. With my experience in parenting, I thought I could offer Arya plenty of advice. But my hopes were not fulfilled. This became clear at the first granddaughter's unveiling party. The truth behind Arya's actions towards me was also revealed. A week after Arya and the baby were discharged from the hospital, Kevin and I rushed to Brian's apartment with gifts for the birth celebration. We brought loads of presents for our granddaughter, including swaddles, a baby carrier, diapers, and formula. Arya looked a bit worn but appeared healthy. I was bothered by her cold gaze when she saw me, but I was too eager to see my granddaughter to care. The first granddaughter was sleeping in her crib. The thought of Brian becoming a dad was deeply moving. Brian seemed to have taken on a more mature look. I laid out the groceries I had bought on the table. Thinking they wouldn't have had proper meals just after the birth, I had bought plenty of ready-made food for Brian and Arya. As I was about to start preparing in the kitchen, "Please sit down, I'll take care of it," Arya said. "You don't have to push yourself," I replied, but Arya insisted and pushed me down into a chair. "It's okay." I sat down, feeling overwhelmed by Arya's insistent behavior. Arya plated the ready-made food and served it in front of Kevin and Brian. "Please eat." I thought my portion would come next, but Arya placed only one plate on the table. Not in front of me, but at her own seat. I had a bad feeling but remained silent. "Oh dear, I forgot Harper's portion." Kevin and Brian laughed. It seemed I was the only one with a bad premonition. But Kevin and Brian were soon frozen by Arya's next action. Arya placed instant ramen in front of me. "There's only enough for the family," I couldn't understand what Arya was saying. As I sat there stunned, Arya added insult to injury with a laugh. "You're not family. You're a stranger. Isn't that obvious?" I didn't understand what she meant by not being family. I realized Arya's feelings towards me hadn't changed from before. Then Kevin stood up.
"Shall we go?"
With just those words, Kevin headed towards the entrance. Yes. I also stood up and followed Kevin. In the apartment lobby, I apologized to Kevin. "I'm sorry for what happened." Kevin looked at me with a gentle smile. "It's Arya who's in the wrong." "What happened?" I told Kevin everything, like a dam bursting. About how Arya suddenly changed her attitude towards me and pretended to be friendly in front of Kevin and Brian. Kevin looked into my eyes and nodded slowly. I asked Kevin why he believed everything I said.
"Well, I never imagined Arya would do such a thing."
If I were in Kevin's position, I would think the same. Arya had been very cunning.
"Harper, you wouldn't lie, especially not to speak ill of someone."
Kevin trusted me. I was really touched by that. Kevin muttered to himself as if talking to himself.
"It would be unthinkable for me, her husband, not to believe Harper."
Tears welled up in my eyes. Kevin handed me a handkerchief with a laugh.
"I'm also to blame for not realizing it sooner."
It couldn't be helped. I had kept it all hidden. "I'm really sorry." Kevin's words made me cry uncontrollably.
"Don't worry about anything. I'm here for you."
Through tears.
"Thank you,"
I said. How dependable Kevin was. I was moved by Kevin's kindness. As we were about to leave the apartment lobby, my phone rang. It was from Brian. Feeling guilty for ruining the celebration of our first granddaughter, I answered the call. Brian's call.
"I want to have a proper discussion, so please come back."
A proper talk. He wanted to apologize for Arya's rudeness and mentioned that Arya had been acting strangely. After consulting with Kevin, we decided to go back. Brian welcomed us at the entrance and led us to the nursery, which was already set up with a study desk and bed. I couldn't help but laugh at how prepared they were. "I'm really sorry about Arya. Has there been trouble for a while?" Brian seemed to have noticed something.
"That time in the kitchen when there was a loud voice, you were arguing, weren't you?"
Right, we had lied about seeing a cockroach. Brian had known all along. I explained to Brian how Arya's attitude changed towards me shortly after their marriage. Brian was silent, but his fists were clenched tightly.
"I'm really sorry."
Brian believed what I said. I thought Brian might defend Arya and call my story a lie. Tears came to my eyes again.
"I've decided to divorce Arya."
Kevin and I were shocked and speechless. "Why?" I managed to say just one word. Kevin nodded in agreement. Brian said as he left the room and headed for the living room.
"I'll explain everything now."
Kevin and I followed him. From the living room came Arya's crying and
"No!"
a scream. The divorce papers were on the dining table. I didn't miss Brian's signature on them. When Arya saw my face, she threw magazines and ornaments she had in her hand at me. One nearly hit me. Then, Kevin shielded me, and a small ornament hit Kevin's face. Kevin's glasses flew off in a wrong direction. Arya probably didn't expect it to hit. She stopped moving, eyes wide open. I was shocked and saw blood flowing from near Kevin's temple. Brian approached Arya with an incredibly stern look, holding her hands down.
"Do you realize what you've done?"
Brian exclaimed in a tone I had never heard from him before. Arya collapsed on the spot as if her legs gave out.
"It's not my fault. I'm not the bad one. It's her."
Arya was muttering the same words over and over, looking dazed. Brian looked at me sadly. Right after we got married, Arya visited Mom, remember? I tried to recall when that was. Then it hit me. I finally understood the discomfort I felt back then. Yes, Arya visited me alone. She had asked me for a loan at that time. Brian was unaware of this loan. So, first, talk to Brian about it, I said. At that time. Understood. Arya quickly agreed and went back home. Since she never consulted me about it again, I assumed it was resolved. This was a secret I kept to myself, so Kevin didn't know. Kevin looked at me, surprised. I'm sorry I didn't tell you. I felt sorry for Arya and didn't say anything.
That's what I hate, your pretense of being good.
Suddenly, Arya hurled insults at me. Quite a vulgar way to speak.
About that loan, Arya borrowed from somewhere else and repaid it.
Brian also told me about Arya's spending habits. Arya has always been extravagant with money. She prefers expensive ingredients and loves brands. Even when Brian met Arya, she was in debt. Brian had a talk with Arya not to borrow any more money. Unless she agreed, he couldn't continue the relationship, and Arya consented. At that time, Arya was crying and apologizing. Brian looked down at Arya sadly.
Anyway, I'm definitely not in the wrong. It's her fault.
Arya insisted she was not to blame, but her words lacked any conviction. Brian and Kevin looked at Arya with cold eyes.
Shut up! Just shut up! Shut up!
Arya began to cry and scream as if she had a tantrum. We couldn't handle her anymore and kept our distance. When Arya was about to smash a ceramic ornament on the floor, the baby in the crib started crying. I rushed to soothe the baby. When Arya yelled,
Shut up! Why is this kid crying?
We were shocked and looked at Arya.
Everyone's just getting in my way. Shut up!
The baby cried louder as if Arya's yelling set it off. I tried to calm the baby, but it wouldn't stop crying.
Ah, so annoying. Make that child stop crying now.
Was this the real Arya? Her way of speaking remained vulgar. Those eyes were not sane. She seemed to have lost her mind. Concerned for the baby's safety, I decided to take the baby to the nursery.
Where are you taking him?
Because I don't know what you might do. Arya was yelling to let go of the baby. Arya, put down that ornament in your hand first. Arya looked at the ceramic she was holding up. Is it okay to show that to the baby? Kevin's calm words seemed to bring Arya back to her senses. She quietly put down the ornament and covered her face with both hands. Arya started crying loudly. In the end, Kevin and I decided to take care of the baby that day. We left Brian and Arya to talk things over slowly. The next day, Brian came to our house. Brian looked haggard but somehow refreshed. In the living room, Kevin and I heard the story from Brian. It was a dreadful one. Yesterday's story was about Arya's terrible spending habits. Despite Brian's persuasion, her spending habits did not improve. In fact, they had gotten worse. Arya, who had been borrowing money from everywhere, had set her sights on our assets. When I heard this, I understood why Arya had looked around our house when she first came. She was checking if there was anything valuable in the house, whether we were wealthy. Then she tried to extract money from me. However, she seemed to have borne a grudge after being refused. That's why she started treating me harshly. I shivered in fear. It wasn't that I was mean and refused to lend her money, I just wanted them to discuss it as a couple first. Arya took it the wrong way. But Brian's story didn't end there. Arya had been acting strange lately, so Brian had hired a detective to investigate. As a result, Arya's affair was discovered. Moreover, Arya was conspiring with that man to steal Kevin's life insurance money. I was shocked.
How could it be?
Brian nodded silently. They were planning to make it look like an accident. Brian continued the story with difficulty. Arya was tormenting me, trying to drive me out of the house. She planned to get rid of Kevin once I was out. What a thing to do. Arya had such a terrifying plan. I shivered and hugged myself. Brian had decided to divorce after receiving the report. He was about to discuss it when this incident happened. Brian said he was going to report it to the police.
We can't stay silent about this.
Indeed, if left unresolved, Arya might repeat her actions. She would take it for granted and do the same or worse. Arya should be properly dealt with, Brian said. Kevin agreed. I told Brian it was for the best too. Brian reported to the police, and Arya was arrested. Since she was trying to fraudulently claim the insurance money, it was natural she was caught. Arya's diary specifically detailed how to obtain the insurance money. Brian and Arya's divorce was finalized while Arya was in custody. Arya seemed to have claimed custody, but naturally, it went to Brian. Even the lawyers were appalled by Arya's claim to custody. If Arya is prosecuted, she and her co-conspirator will likely receive actual prison sentences. I want Arya to reflect deeply and face her crimes in prison. Not only did she ruin Brian's life, but she also caused great trouble for the child born into this mess. The assault on Kevin did not become a case because Kevin did not file a complaint. That was typical of Kevin's kindness. With Arya gone, peace has returned to my heart. I sleep well at night, and my heart doesn't race when I visit Brian's house. Life with just Kevin and me has been peaceful. The times Arya stirred up trouble seem like a lie to me now. Brian and the grandchild live together. Fortunately, Kevin and I live nearby. We help with everything from childcare center drop-offs and pickups to meals. Above all, being able to watch the grandchild grow up close is a joy. If things continue this way, Kevin and I might see the grandchild's coming-of-age ceremony. The grandchild was a baby, so he doesn't remember mom. It might be sad, but it's probably better that such a mom isn't around. Besides, it seems Brian has a girlfriend. The grandchild whispered it to me as a secret. I'm looking forward to Brian introducing the woman he wants to introduce. There's only enough for the family. Finally, my sister Whitney has given birth. Our family was overjoyed, and even though it wasn't Christmas, relatives gathered together. The stars of the show were, of course, Whitney and her baby. With food and drinks ready, the party began. After we all toasted, my husband Brad approached Whitney and the baby. Whitney handed the baby to Brad, and he held the baby in his arms. Brad looked at the baby with such a loving gaze, as if he were holding his own child.
Hello, baby. Oh, you're so cute.
After admiring the baby, he turned to me and said, "If only you could actually have kids." Followed by a sigh.
Still really cute. Wonder who it looks like.
He insulted me in front of all the relatives, seemingly unaware of the icy atmosphere that followed. In the frozen silence, the family gathered around Brad and Whitney, enclosing them. Whitney and Brad, engrossed with the baby, hadn't noticed until Whitney's husband Chuck spoke up.
It really doesn't seem to take after me. There are elements of Whitney, though.
He confronted Brad calmly. It seemed Whitney and Brad finally noticed the awkward air. Surrounded by relatives, they looked to be huddling together. Overall, Brad. It seems to take after you, don't you think? Donald, Brad's dad, added insult to injury.
Really now? Brad, it's the spitting image of you when you were little.
His tone was cold, unfitting for the celebration.
Eh?
Seeing Brad taken aback, I couldn't help but let out a smile. Brad had no idea that I had been laying the groundwork with the relatives. I'm Zoe, 42 years old. My life has been nothing extraordinary. Not academically gifted, nor athletically talented. Not the type to stand out. I've probably been forgotten by my classmates, leading a plain life. I have a younger sister, Whitney. Unlike me, Whitney is beautiful and stylish. Though our age difference spared me from blatant comparisons, from what I saw, Whitney was adored by many from a young age. Becoming a show-off in elementary school worked to her advantage, making her a central figure in her class. People gravitated towards her, regardless of gender, and after school, friends were always coming over. As she grew older, perhaps thinking little of my plainness, Whitney would say, "Zoe, you're so plain. Make sure not to show your face when my friends are over." Ignoring me even when her friends weren't around. Confused by Whitney's attitude and feeling uneasy around my own sister, I decided to move out. I had a job lined up and had saved some money from working part-time while attending college. So I moved out without anyone stopping me. It was lonely at times, but being alone was more comfortable than being nagged by Whitney. Occasionally, when I visited home, I heard from Mom that Whitney's behavior seemed to be getting worse year by year. By the time she was in high school, Whitney started going after people's boyfriends. And Mom would come to me for advice. But since I had no experience with love, all I could do was try to console Mom. In the end, Whitney never changed, and Mom's worries never ceased. I became close to a senior coworker while working together on a project. His name was Brad. He was 2 years older than me, someone I had been on the same team with since the last project. I had never been approached by men before, but after the project ended and we all went out for drinks, he asked for my contact information. Even while drinking, I was the sober one, taking care of drunk colleagues and supporting the organizer, which apparently caught his attention.
How about we go out for dinner, just the two of us?
Thinking he had asked for my contact for work-related reasons, I was surprised by his sudden invitation. Finding no reason to decline and thinking this would be a one-time thing, I accepted his invitation. However, when we actually sat down to eat and talk, we got along so well that time flew by. Unable to suppress the feeling that I didn't want it to end with just this once, I found myself saying, "May I have the pleasure of inviting you out next time," in a surprising move. Perhaps it was the alcohol talking. I was flustered after saying those words. Brad looked stunned. "Oh no."
I didn't mean that. I'm sorry. I meant for work advice, not that. I didn't have any ulterior motive."
I rushed to explain, wanting to run away from the embarrassment. Then, ulterior motive. "You're an interesting person, Zoe." Brad burst out laughing.
I'd be happier if it was with ulterior motives.
Suddenly serious, Brad took my arm. "Shall we go to another place?" I quietly nodded and followed Brad. I'll never forget that night. Even after we got married, we would laugh about it when recalling that time. My first love at 28 felt embarrassing, but he accepted me and took the lead. With him, my once plain life seemed to blossom into something beautiful. At 28, I finally understood what love was, and I gained confidence. 2 years later, he proposed, and we got married. Me, Zoe, 30 years old. Married at a nice round age. And with a new name, I decided to start a new life. I got along well with Brad's parents, especially Mael, as if we were friends. The common mother-in-law and daughter-in-law conflict was non-existent for us. Whitney, attending our wedding, seemed enraptured by the atmosphere, barely acknowledging me. After the ceremony, as Brad and I were heading to the next venue, Whitney ran up to us.
Zoe! Today's wedding was so beautiful. It makes me want to get married soon too.
Any past resentment seemed gone. Whitney smiled at me.
It's about time I settled down too. Not just any man will do. I'll find the right one and have a wedding that everyone can celebrate.
It seemed our wedding made her crave a normal happiness. Declaring her intention to change, Whitney left. I was stunned by our brief exchange, but wanted to believe in her words of change. If my image had cast a positive light on Whitney, then I was satisfied. Feeling that years of resentment had dissipated made me genuinely happy. I looked forward to having face-to-face conversations in the future. Since my marriage, Mom's worries shifted from Whitney to me. Yes, about children. Getting married at 30, I understood my parents' eagerness to see grandchildren. Of course, I wanted children too. I was working but planned to quit if I had a child. Initially, I hadn't thought deeply about it, but as time went on, I grew tired of Mom's constant nudging. Wanting to respond to my parents' feelings, I began to excessively consult with Brad. Initially, Brad took it lightly, saying, "Don't rush, it'll happen when it's meant to." However, as I repeatedly brought up the same concerns,
"Come on, I'm tired today. Let's not talk about this anymore,"
he started to visibly show his annoyance. 5 years into our marriage, we hadn't had children, and by that time, Brad seemed to have given up. I was 35 before I knew it. Nowadays, it's not uncommon for people older than me to have children. But I knew I was reaching the age where I had to prepare myself. I knew that if we truly wanted children, we would have to undergo the appropriate tests and treatments. And I was aware of how difficult that could be. Brad was saying, even without children, we have the option to enjoy life together. But I couldn't give up. Should we try getting tested, just once? Holding on to a last hope, I asked Brad. Brad was reluctant but agreed to go to the hospital. Perhaps thinking that if a problem was identified with either of us, I would give up. However, Brad's attitude became colder after we went for the tests. When we went back to the hospital to get the results, I understood why Brad was being cold. The issue with not being able to have children was on Brad's side. Unable to accept the test results, perhaps because of his pride, Brad started to take out his frustration on me. Unable to maintain a happy relationship, all I could do was wait for him to calm down. 3 years later, Brad's demeanor had improved compared to back then. But he still came home late or not at all sometimes. By that time, Whitney had finally found someone to marry. It had been 8 years since our wedding, and it seemed she had struggled a lot during that time. Her habit of playing around since her younger days was hard to break. And even when she found someone good, she would quickly lose interest, so relationships didn't last. However, the man Whitney found this time was broad-minded enough to accept all of her past actions. Moreover, we learned at their wedding that Whitney's husband was an elite businessman working for a major trading company. How they met and got to the point of marriage was unclear, but seeing Whitney happy reminded me of my own early marriage days. I hadn't imagined things turning out this way back then. Still, I believed that marrying Brad was my happiness. Even without children, we could still make it as a couple. Watching Whitney in her wedding dress, I reaffirmed my love for Brad in my heart. Realizing that children were not in the cards for Brad and me, Mom shifted her hopes to Whitney. Honestly, I was relieved to no longer be pressured by Mom. Whitney was still in her 20s and likely to meet Mom's expectations. Somewhere inside, I too had hopes for Whitney. 3 years later, the grandchild Mom had been longing for was finally on its way, growing inside Whitney. Mom cried and thanked Whitney when she found out. Hearing this news, I felt like my worries were finally over. It had been such a long journey to this day. My relationship with Brad wasn't great, but I hoped this could be a turning point. We hadn't spoken much lately. Whenever he did open his mouth, it was only to make snide remarks, but Brad's attitude seemed to change when he learned about Whitney's pregnancy. Perhaps he felt guilty towards my mom for us not being able to have children. As Whitney's belly grew, conversations with Brad increased. Whitney's due date was drawing close. At home, the anticipation for the first grandchild made Dad and Mom restless. And then, Whitney finally gave birth. Our family was overjoyed, and relatives gathered together even though it wasn't Christmas. Attending Whitney's baby shower were Brad and me. Brad's parents, Whitney and my dad and mom, and Whitney's husband Chuck and his parents. It was the first time so many relatives had gathered together. The stars of the show were, of course, Whitney and her baby. I was busy in the kitchen preparing the food and drinks. With everything ready, the party started. After we all toasted, Brad approached Whitney and the baby. Whitney handed the baby to Brad, and he held the baby in his arms. Normally, showing a baby to relatives would be a common sight, but something felt off. Brad looked at the baby with such a loving gaze, as if he were holding his own child. The affection he showed towards his wife's sister's child seemed a bit too intense. Without caring about that, Brad held the baby and murmured, "Hello, baby. Aw, you're so cute." After showering the baby with love, he turned to me and bitterly said, "If only you could actually have kids." Followed by a sigh. "Still really cute. Wonder who it looks like." He insulted me in front of all the relatives, seemingly unaware of the icy atmosphere that followed. In the frozen silence, my dad, Brad's parents, Chuck, and his parents gathered around Brad and Whitney, enclosing them. Whitney and Brad, engrossed with the baby, hadn't noticed until Chuck finally spoke up. "Really, it doesn't seem to take after me. It seems to have few similarities with Whitney too." He calmly confronted Brad. It seemed Whitney and Brad finally noticed the awkward air. Surrounded by relatives, they appeared to be huddling together. "Overall, Brad, it seems to take after you, don't you think?" Brad's dad added to the tension, saying, "Indeed. Brad, it's the spitting image of you when you were little." His voice was cold, inappropriate for the celebration. Seeing Brad taken aback, I couldn't help but smile. Brad was unaware that I had been laying the groundwork with the relatives. Months ago, I happened to see Brad's mobile phone. That day, I had taken the morning off to go to the hospital and found Brad's phone left on the dining table. Thinking to deliver it to him at work later, I was about to put it in my bag when the phone vibrated. Curiosity led me to glance at the screen, displaying a message from Whitney. "Your baby is growing bigger." My blood ran cold. Next, I was seething with anger. Whitney was trying to steal Brad. Given Whitney's past behavior, there was no doubt in my mind. To confirm, I looked at the message exchange between Whitney and Brad. It was an affair. Whitney planned to pass Brad's child as Chuck's. Brad was waiting for the right time to divorce me and remarry Whitney. I took photos of the message exchange as evidence. Since then, I've acted oblivious. Brad's parents believed me immediately due to our close relationship. They also felt sorry for their son's actions. I approached Chuck about it once before Whitney gave birth. He seemed to have had suspicions about Whitney's pregnancy. Showing him the evidence, he agreed to my plan. And so, we've come to this moment. Brad, caught off guard, while Whitney smiled brightly. "Stop it, everyone, that's such a bad joke," she said, feigning innocence. "Would you stop your bad jokes?" The voice trembled with anger. I felt sorry for asking everyone to play along until now. And Whitney seemed to finally sense the deep loathing in his angry voice. Whitney's complexion changed. Noticing this, Brad stepped in to defend her. Hey, Whitney's just tired from giving birth. No need to speak like that. I confronted Brad, fueled by the future he planned for his mistress. I see you can be kind for the sake of your future wife. I showed him the screen of his mobile phone. The photo of the message exchange with Whitney. Brad, shocked then glaring, yelled,
"What the hell is this?"
He stood up, grabbing me by the collar.
"When did you start doing such dirty things?"
He didn't even try to make excuses. It would have been better if he had tried to explain it was all a misunderstanding. When he raised his fist at me, Chuck intervened.
"Stop raising your hand to a woman."
The grip Chuck had on Brad's arm was forceful. Brad shook off his hand and retorted in frustration.
"Saying that. Aren't you two the ones in a shady relationship?"
Retreating while rubbing his grabbed arm. Whitney, seizing the moment, jumped into the fray.
"Yeah. Instead of doubting Brad and me, you should be looking into these too."
However, it seemed like no one was listening to her. The silence was broken by me and Whitney's dad. Enough, Whitney. Dad had always been a man of few words. He was gentle and, according to Mom, sometimes too soft, never getting angry at Whitney's misbehavior. But this time, he couldn't stay silent. "It's your bad habit, isn't it? I thought you had changed after getting married, but stealing your sister's husband." Dad spoke quietly but with a voice as cold as ice to Whitney. "I should have scolded you more. I didn't want you to see me like this." After giving me a sorrowful look, Dad slapped Whitney's cheek hard.
"Ouch!"
Looking down at Whitney holding her cheek, he sighed and then turned to Brad.
"No, Donald. It's not like that. This is all a misunderstanding."
Brad finally tried to defend himself just as Dad's fist hit him. Brad crumpled to the ground. Then, Dad loudly said to them,
"The pain you're feeling is nothing compared to what Zoe and Chuck went through. Do you understand?"
Whitney's sobbing could be heard, though it was doubtful if her tears were from remorse. Dad turned to Chuck and his parents to apologize deeply. "I'm truly sorry for the unforgivable act my daughter has committed." Mom also apologized next to Dad. Then to Brad's parents, "I'm sorry for raising my hand to Brad in front of you," apologizing deeply once again. Brad's parents also apologized to us.
"What is this? I did nothing wrong."
Brad began to shout, breaking the silence.
"It's all because Zoe is infertile."
What a pitiful sight.
"So, it's not my fault."
Whitney also started to struggle.
"It's Zoe's fault. Having such a wonderful husband but not being able to bear children. So I decided to have his child instead."
Whitney seemed to realize midway. No one was on their side. Cold stares were fixed on them. I decided to make it clear. "Listen, Whitney." I struggled to keep my anger from seeping into my gentle tone. "The cause of infertility wasn't me."
"Wah!"
Whitney was stunned. "We had fertility tests done." Everyone listened silently to my voice. "The results showed that Brad was the cause." The room went quiet.
"Wah! No, that."
Whitney's eyes began to dart around. A habit when she's hiding something.
"Brad? That's a lie, right?"
Whitney confronted Brad, but he was deflated.
"I don't accept those test results."
Brad couldn't accept that he was the one unable to have children, but I showed the hospital's test result papers. Dad and Mom looked at the evidence, and from Whitney's reaction, it seemed they realized something.
"Whitney, whose child is that baby really?"
Delivering the final blow.
It's Chuck's child, obviously.
She seemed unaware that her story was changing by the moment.
Then, to put Chuck's mind at ease, why not do a DNA test?
Whitney's eyes darted around nervously.
There's no need for that. It's Chuck's child.
Mom approached Whitney, speaking to her with the gentleness one uses with a small child. Whitney, let's get tested, shall we? I want to believe you, Whitney. Let me believe you this time. Her voice trembled towards the end. Mom was sobbing, huddled over.
You're old enough, Whitney. It's time to take responsibility.
Dad told Whitney, then apologized again to everyone gathered. He promised to report the results later, and Whitney's baby celebration party came to an end. Whitney stubbornly refused the DNA test, but her attitude only spurred our parents more. Dad tried to persuade Whitney himself, but she wasn't willing to listen. Eventually, without Whitney's consent, the test was forcibly conducted. Meanwhile, I had moved out of the house I shared with Brad. Brad, still not accepting his infertility, joked, "So, Whitney will move in after you leave." But I was already starting the divorce proceedings, undistracted. Months after the family gathering, Mom contacted me about Whitney's DNA test results. We were to return to our parents' house to hear the outcome. Brad, Chuck, and I listened intently to the results, which were unexpected by all. A heavy sigh escaped everyone's lips. The father of Whitney's child was neither Chuck nor Brad.
What on earth does this mean?
Dad couldn't contain his anger, even more furious than when he had slapped Whitney.
What does this mean, you say?
Whitney asked rhetorically, but no one supported her.
Whitney, explain yourself.
Chuck admonished her in a low voice. Resigned, perhaps realizing she couldn't escape the truth any longer, Whitney explained in a small voice.
I don't know who the father is. Chuck was so busy with work right after we got married, and I felt so lonely.
Her voice gradually turned whiny.
It's not my fault Chuck made me feel lonely, right? The child is innocent. Let's pretend that night never happened. Please.
Whitney moved closer to Chuck, not Brad.
So, what about you and Brad?
Chuck asked gently.
Right. Brad was just for fun. I was entertaining him because things weren't going well with Zoe.
Whitney glanced at Brad and laughed. Besides, Brad may come from a wealthy family, but he's so stingy. He never spoiled me. Chuck, you're the only one for me. Whitney clung to Chuck's arm. Brad, faced with the realization of his infertility and Whitney's abandonment, was just staring blankly. So it is. Chuck muttered softly, then forcefully shook off Whitney's clinging arm. Whitney fell off the couch, but Chuck stood up, towering over her. I've had enough. Talking to you any further is a waste of time. His eyes filled with hatred and sorrow. Dad and Mom said, we'll send the divorce papers later. Thank you for everything up to now. Without giving Whitney another look, Chuck left the house. It's the expected outcome, Mom said, placing a hand on Whitney's shoulder.
From now on, you're nothing to me. Leave this house immediately.
Mom had always ultimately accepted Whitney despite her behavior. But this time it seemed she had reached her limit. I've been too lenient. But don't worry, I won't bother with you anymore. Live strong on your own. We had never seen Mom react so coldly before. But her resolve seemed firm, as if she had come to a clear decision. Dad agreed with her decision, and it was decided that Whitney would be kicked out of the house. So, how long do you plan to stay here? I asked Brad, who was left behind. Brad slowly looked up at me. Then, as if realizing something too late, he asked, Zoe, that kid wasn't mine, right?
If so, I'm innocent. Whitney was just playing around, as she said. So, why don't we call off the divorce and start over?
I was speechless. After all the mocking, he had the nerve to say that.
I have no intention of starting over with you. I wish I never have to see you again. So please, leave this house right now.
I grabbed a mop nearby and hit Brad with it.
Get out now!
I shouted as I chased him out. Later, I finalized the divorce with Brad. I had gotten along well with Mil and wanted to keep in touch, but it wasn't to be. Mil and I had a farewell meal together, mourning our separation. Upon learning of my divorce with Brad, Whitney, who had been hesitant, agreed to divorce Chuck and finally left the family home. She seemed to intend to move in with Brad, but he refused her. Brad, too, was no longer in a position to support Whitney financially. After our divorce, Brad left his job due to discomfort at our shared workplace. He tried to help with the family business but became estranged from his family and is now looking for new employment while surviving on part-time work. Of course, with alimony payments to me, his life is far from easy. Whitney moving in would be nothing but a nuisance, especially considering she played with his feelings. Shunned by her family, abandoned by Brad, and pursued by Chuck for alimony. Whitney began to drift through the night streets, escaping from everything. But she wasn't the type to attract ordinary men anymore. Once relying on her beauty, post-pregnancy Whitney did nothing to restore her figure. Losing all remnants of her past glory. Unable to escape the glory of being adored in her youth, she became obsessed with a man she met in a nightclub. Drowning in debt and resorting to selling herself, she has fallen to a point of no return. Dad and Mom hired a detective agency to track Whitney's whereabouts, determined never to let her return home. They sold the family home and moved to a condominium in the next town. Mom, sharing this with me, looked sad but resolved not to extend a helping hand to Whitney. If her life were in danger, that'd be different. But that's it. We've decided not to do anything more. Mom's too gentle to bear Whitney's current state, but knows extending help again wouldn't lead to her reform. This is what being a mom is about. Though I never had children of my own, witnessing Mom's compassion and strength fills me with respect. Dad and Mom have taken in Whitney's child, who is nearly 2 years old. His rapid growth is astonishing, and I've been experiencing childcare during visits to my parents' house. I wonder what kind of adult this child without Dad or Mom will become. Yet, I'm determined to shower him with enough love to never feel lesser for it. Today, once again, I received an email from Mom about Whitney's child. We are planning to go on a trip together on the next day off. On my way home from work, I looked up at the night sky and wished for the child's growth. May he grow up to be honest, bright, and earnest. And then, I returned to my solitary apartment, where no one waits. Seeing my granddaughter Mary not touching her hamburger, the server approached us with a stern tone. You need to eat what you've ordered, or it'll be a problem. Would you normally say that to a customer? Arguing seemed futile, so I responded humbly. I'm sorry. I think she's just waiting for mine to arrive. After my apologetic reply, the server walked away, looking dissatisfied. What a rude attitude. Trying to lighten the mood, I turned to Mary.
Let's eat, shall we?
But Mary remained downcast.
What's wrong?
Something seemed off. Then, the same server came back to our table, carrying something. Here's the toy that comes with the kids' meal. She slammed the toy onto the table. Looking up at the server, I saw her smirking at Mary. It was a chilling sight. Mary must have felt something was wrong too.
I don't want this.
She threw the toy on the table to the floor. She's never usually so rough. Now. We shouldn't throw things. As I tried to calm Mary and pick up the toy she had thrown. Suddenly,
Grandma, let's get out of here!
Mary grabbed my arm as I was reaching for the toy and shouted. Looking at the discarded toy, I noticed a piece of paper with something written on it.
Grandma! No!
Ignoring Mary's plea, I looked at the folded paper and felt a chill. It was a Saturday. I was on my way to my son Jim's house. It was a warm day, hinting that spring was near. Then, Mom, thanks for today as well. As soon as I arrived, Jim and his wife Kate left the house together for their once or twice a month Saturday work.
Grandma, what's for lunch today?
After seeing her parents off, Mary came to me with a lovely smile. How about we go out to eat today? Mary was delighted with my suggestion. My name is Ellie. I am 63 years old this year. When my son and his wife are busy, I come to look after Mary like this. Having lost my husband early and spent a lot of time alone, the time spent with my granddaughter was nothing short of happiness for me. My son Jim has always tried hard not to be a burden on me. Even though there's no need for him to worry about me, he's been working ever since he graduated from high school. Thinking back, his first job was terrible. It was then I truly understood what a black company was, even as a parent. He would leave for work early in the morning and return home around the time the date changed. You could visibly see him getting thinner, even though he was quite well built, as he continued with that lifestyle. Seeing my son Jim become increasingly distressed, I somehow managed to convince him, and finally, he decided to quit that job. It had been 3 years since he started working there. Though there seemed to be some issues with the company upon leaving, I felt relieved once he was free from that place. I'm going to be unemployed for a while. Jim said this with a look of regret, but seeing my child physically and mentally deteriorating was much harder for me. When I told him that, I'll take my time to think and decide on the next place. He smiled, seemingly reassured. Being a hard worker, he continued his job search while studying for a qualification in a field he was interested in, and finally, he found a new job. I was worried because of the first experience, but the new workplace turned out to be surprisingly clean. He would come home on time, and there was no unpaid overtime. Jim seemed to have some peace of mind and was lively and enthusiastic about going to work every day. When he started to be recognized for his abilities and got on a career track, "There's something important I want to talk about," he said suddenly with a serious look. "I'm sensitive to these things." He must want to introduce a girlfriend. "Something important?" I feigned ignorance and asked. "There's someone I want you to meet, Mom." My intuition was right. Jim had dated a few women before. I wasn't explicitly told, but you can somehow tell. But this was the first time he wanted to introduce someone to me. "So, that means?" "I'm free whenever, so let me know when you've decided on a day to bring her over," I said casually, feeling a mix of happiness and sadness. Later, the woman Jim brought over was polite and greeted properly. I've always taught Jim to greet properly since he was young. So, the first impression was perfect. I didn't intend to judge, but I couldn't help noticing her appearance and behavior. "Nice to meet you, I'm Kate." She seemed nervous, her small frame tense. "Nice to meet you too, I'm Jim's mom." Wondering if I'd been staring too much, I greeted her brightly to ease the tension. "Jim, why don't you two sit in the living room and wait?" While they waited in the living room, I prepared some coffee. Before bringing it over, they were whispering to each other but quieted down when they saw me. As I served the coffee, I heard them say thank you. But then, there was silence for a while. How do mothers around the world liven up moments like these? It's my first time, and I'm just puzzled. "Huh? But it's everyone's first time in these situations, isn't it? Realizing something so obvious made me laugh unexpectedly. Jim and Kate looked at me, puzzled. I'm sorry. It's just that it's the first time Jim's brought a girlfriend over, so I'm a bit nervous. I decided to just be myself from now on. After all, we're going to be a family for a long time.
I'm nervous too. But today, we have something we want to tell you, Mom.
Here it comes. This is the moment to listen seriously.
Mom, we're thinking of getting married.
I thought so. We've already got the okay from Kate's parents, but... Jim stops mid-sentence, looking surprised. Next to him, Kate also seems flustered. What are they both so flustered about? Mom. They peek at my face, worried. Wondering what was happening, I felt something cold spill onto my hand on my lap. It took me a moment to realize, but it seems tears were falling from my eyes.
I'm so sorry. Did I do something wrong?
It's the first meeting, and here the mother of the person they want to marry is suddenly crying. Kate's panicked reaction is now a funny story, but at that moment, she must have been really anxious.
Oh, why is this happening? I'm not even sure myself.
Saying that, I laughed through my tears. I had no intention of opposing Jim's marriage. In fact, I was happy that he had finally found someone to be happy with other than me. These tears must be of happiness. But I couldn't deny feeling like a part of my heart was being taken away. After excusing myself for a moment and coming back, they still looked worried. With a deliberately cheerful voice, I said, Kate, I trust Jim. If he chose you, I know everything will be okay no matter what. Kate seemed to be waiting for what I would say next.
Promise me, both of you, to build a happy family together.
I could see Kate's expression brighten.
Thank you, Mom. All right, no more serious talk.
With that, I started asking about how they got to know each other and their journey to deciding on marriage. While Jim was seeing Kate out, I muttered to my husband's portrait. Jim is getting married. Time flies, doesn't it? It felt as if the portrait of my husband smiled back. Kate works at the same place as Jim, and she plans to continue working even after getting married. Jim wanted to live together, but I declined. I didn't want to intrude on the young couple, and I was looking forward to having time to myself. Neither wanting to be a burden nor to burden them. They decided on a new home within cycling distance from our house, and Jim moved out. Time flew by, and soon my granddaughter Mary was born. I was amazed at how adorable a creature a grandchild could be. As Kate's maternity leave was coming to an end, I checked with Jim. Have you decided who will look after Mary? I was hoping for a chance to take care of Mary. Not out of kindness or obligation, but because I wanted to be with her. However, Jim thought I was worried and gave me a disappointing reply.
Mom, don't worry. Our company has a daycare.
Jim's new job really seemed to be a respectable white-collar company. I guess I won't be taking care of her. A few days later, Kate, who had been observing our conversation, brought me hope.
Ellie, are you free this Saturday?
She asked over the phone, and since I had no particular plans, I inquired about the matter. Actually, both Jim and I have sudden work on Saturday. And the daycare is closed on Saturdays. I immediately responded. Mary? You mean if I could take care of Mary? I was leaning forward even though I was on the phone. Could you? I almost answered too eagerly, but kept my composure.
Yes, that's fine.
My voice must have trembled with excitement. Kate sounded happy on the other end of the phone. Since then, I occasionally take care of Mary, which has continued to this day. As it approached noon, I took Mary out. As promised, we walked to the nearby family restaurant. I would prefer to eat at home, but after receiving suspicious calls and an unexpected pizza delivery while taking care of Mary at Jim's house, I felt uneasy. The family restaurant we were heading to was where I had worked part-time before, familiar and convenient for us. Upon arrival, the staff guided us to the usual spacious sofa seat. It was Saturday lunchtime, but it wasn't too crowded. "Mary, what would you like to eat today?" I handed her the menu while sitting next to her. "I want the kids' menu." Mary opened the menu to the kids' menu page. "I'll have this." She pointed to her usual choice, a hamburger. Mary really loves hamburgers, doesn't she? Seeing Mary's smiling face, I chose my own meal. Although spring was near, the days were still a bit chilly. I decided on the seasonal pot au feu. After placing our order via the touch panel, we went to the drink bar. Mary chose orange juice, and I filled a cup with coffee, then we returned to our seats. "Did Grandma know I like hamburgers?" "Of course." It was a casual conversation, but my face was smiling the whole time. "Right, Mary. Go to the bathroom before we eat." Mary often wants to go to the bathroom during meals, so I encouraged her to go ahead. "Okay." With a lively response, Mary headed to the bathroom. Her steps seemed lighter, perhaps excited for the hamburger. Her retreating figure was endearing to me. When Mary returned, the hamburger was served. But she didn't start eating. Maybe she was waiting for my meal to arrive. "Mary, you can start eating." I encouraged, but Mary looked at me puzzled. That's when the server brought my pot au feu. Noticing Mary hadn't touched her burger, the server spoke in a stern tone. "You need to eat what you've ordered." Would you normally say that to a customer? Surprised, I thought about the food waste issue and wondered if staff were instructed to say this. Arguing seemed pointless, so I responded humbly. "I'm sorry. She's just waiting for mine. We'll make sure it's eaten." The server left with a look of dissatisfaction. She was strikingly beautiful but had such a poor attitude. Shaking off my astonishment, I encouraged Mary. "Let's eat." However, Mary remained downcast and didn't touch her hamburger. "What's wrong, Mary?" Something seemed off. Then the same server approached with something in hand. "Here's the toy that comes with the kids' meal," she said bluntly, placing the toy on the table. Something was wrong. I boldly looked at the server, who was smirking at Mary. It wasn't a kind smile, but something creepy, as if plotting. Feeling a chill, Mary must have sensed something too. "I don't want this." She threw the toy on the floor. Something she'd never normally do. Under different circumstances, I would scold her, but this was different. Aware of other customers, I tried to calm her. Now. We shouldn't throw things." As I tried to calm Mary and pick up the toy she had thrown. Suddenly, "Grandma, let's get out of here!" Mary grabbed my arm as I was reaching for the toy and shouted. "What are you talking about?" I noticed something had come out of the discarded toy. Like a piece of paper. "Grandma, no!" Ignoring Mary's plea, I looked at the folded paper and was horrified. It was covered in what looked like a spell. "What is this?" I remembered the suspicious calls at Jim's house, with a voice chanting a spell as soon as I answered. Could there be a connection? Noticing something was wrong, the manager came out from the back. "Is there something wrong?" he asked, offering a hand as I crouched. He seemed to notice the paper in my hand. "What is this?" The manager looked disgusted. Standing up, I explained the situation. The unpleasant server just glared at Mary, silent. "I'm very sorry." The manager apologized, but the woman wouldn't take her eyes off Mary. I feared for Mary's safety and hugged her close, addressing the woman. Even though the manager has apologized, don't you have anything to say? I had tried not to upset her, but it seems I reached my limit too. My tone became a bit harsh. Perhaps triggered by my tone, the woman suddenly shouted, "If it weren't for this brat!" She lunged at Mary. Instinctively, I shielded Mary, and the woman scratched me, yelling, "Move! Let go!" The manager tried to stop her, but he couldn't restrain her alone. Hearing the commotion, several male staff members subdued her, and someone had called the police. Mary started crying out of fear. "I'm sorry, Mary," I said, holding my scratched area and comforting her trembling body. Before the situation escalated further, Mary and I were taken to the restaurant's office. The woman was there too. "Emma, why did you do that?" The manager asked her, but she remained silent. "I'm really sorry." The store manager apologized to us again. As I was pondering over the situation, the police arrived. "Emma, 33 years old." I overheard her name during the separate questioning. I told the police about Emma's aggressive behavior towards Mary for not eating her hamburger and about the suspicious paper in the toy. Then, Mary, who had been listening, "Grandma, it's not that." She tugged at my sleeve. "What's wrong?" I asked, but she seemed hesitant. "Mary, can you tell me that story?" A young police officer gently encouraged her. "I saw it. When I was going to the bathroom, that woman put shrimp in the hamburger." Mary hesitantly testified. It was a fact I hadn't known. "So that's why you didn't eat it?" It sounded like Emma clicked her tongue. The young officer seemed to realize. This child has a shellfish allergy. He finally understood and asked the manager to check if the hamburger was still available. "Too bad, it must have been disposed of by now." Emma spoke up for the first time after the two had left the office, crossing her arms and legs with a disdainful look. "Could you answer our questions as well?" The officer sighed in disbelief at her questioning. "That's what I've been saying. I have nothing to tell. I'll keep silent." Emma fell silent again, idly playing with her loosely permed hair, looking bored. Her demeanor changed drastically when the manager and the young police officer returned to the office. In the officer's hand was a plate with a cold hamburger. Emma looked as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing. Under the police officer's supervision, the manager cut the hamburger open. Inside wasn't just shrimp, but also crab meat used in crab cream croquettes. "Does this restaurant's hamburgers normally contain shrimp and crab meat?" the officer asked, probably for confirmation. "No, they do not." The manager seemed disappointed. Then, everyone in the room turned their gaze towards Emma. She kept her head down and didn't move, but then she started to shake her shoulders. "Emma." When the manager spoke to her, a small voice leaked out. I thought she might be crying, but it turned out she was trying to suppress laughter. Lifting her face, she finally couldn't hold back and burst out laughing loudly. "I got caught." Her voice was buoyant, like someone caught in a mischievous act, clearly enjoying herself. "I'll tell you everything. But I want that handsome guy over there, not you." She pointed at the young police officer after hearing our conversation. "Behave yourself." The officer who had been questioning Emma scolded her. "Oh, don't look so scary." Emma winked, but it seemed ineffective on the experienced officer. What a woman. I could only stare in disbelief at the scene. The details Emma bragged about were beyond normal comprehension for me. She claimed to be Jim's ex-girlfriend, a co-worker from his previous black company. Jim was treated as incompetent there, so Emma had broken up with him. However, upon hearing rumors of Jim's success at his new job, she attempted to reconnect. But Jim. Emma showed no remorse for her actions.
I even graciously offered to get back together, and he rejected me,
she complained. Understandably so. Jim was already married to Kate, and they had Mary.
I thought if I could just deal with a child, he'd choose me over that plain woman.
She spoke as if expecting understanding, but surely no one empathized. Emma had been monitoring Jim and Mary, engaging in harassment whenever she disapproved of something. The delivery orders I didn't recognize and the suspicious calls were her doing. When I started bringing Mary to this family restaurant, Emma also started working here, learning Mary's preferences and allergies. I was horrified. I even regretted inadvertently revealing Mary's allergy myself. I embraced Mary as she leaned against me. I thought I finally had my chance today. After confessing everything, Emma sighed with disappointment. When her story ended, the police officer took her away from the office. As she left, she glared at Mary and laughed creepily, which made me tighten my embrace. After apologizing to the restaurant staff for the inconvenience and thanking the person who saved the hamburger from being disposed of, Mary and I went back to Jim's house. We waited for Kate and Jim to come home and then told them about the day's events.
That woman, she did what?
Jim clenched his fist, trembling with anger, but Kate gently enveloped his hand.
I had heard about her, but what a terrible woman.
Kate knew of her from Jim's stories. If only I had rejected her more firmly. No, it's not your fault. I should have been more careful, too. Leaving everything to Ellie and even making her scared. Both Jim and Kate blamed themselves. I felt the same. Had I adequately protected Mary while she was in my care? In the heavy silence, Kate finally spoke. At least Mary is safe. That's all that matters. To ensure such an incident wouldn't repeat, we discussed and decided that Jim's family would move. Emma was sentenced to a severe prison term for attempting to harm a child. Unsatisfied with the verdict, she became frenzied and violent in court, looking possessed. Watching her from the gallery, Kate and I decided to remodel our home to protect Mary from that demon again. Emma continued to chant spells in prison, deemed insane, and was eventually transferred to a psychiatric ward. I was certain she wouldn't leave there. Watching her frenzied state confirmed my belief. But still, we needed reassurance. Jim's family moved into a home equipped with security cameras, alarms, and immediate security response. Kate switched to part-time work for more flexibility and spent more time with Mary. We were determined never to let Mary be scared again. We likely still share that sentiment. Grandma, why do you look scared? 5 years later, Mary, soon to be a 5th grader, peered into my face. Oh? Did I look scared? I diverted the topic.
Let's get ready. Aren't we going out to eat?
And also called out to Kate and Mary's sister, Lucy. It was Saturday. Basking in the warm spring sunshine, we started walking. Mary held Lucy's hand as they walked ahead, while Kate and I followed, watching their backs.
Stop leeching off me already!
For over 2 decades, I thought I was giving my all to William. Yet, this is how he sees me? I wasn't leeching off him. I was just devoted to you. That's what I thought, but the words wouldn't come. As my strength drained away, William continued. Now that Daniel's working, you've got no reason to leech off me anymore.
But... Shut up. I don't want to hear your excuses.
William raised his voice. It's over. My feelings never reached him. Just as I realized that, I heard something snap inside me. It was the sound of the thread of love that had been connecting our hearts, snapping. At the same time, my feelings for William began to fade. We were spouses just moments ago, but now, we're like strangers. William was just using me all along. He never loved me. Otherwise, he wouldn't brazenly cheat and try to kick me out. I don't care what happens to such a man. The only option left is to completely crush him. I've made up my mind. I lifted my face and gazed at William. My name is Susan, I'm 50 years old. I've been married to my husband William for 25 years. Our son Daniel, born a few years after we got married, graduated from college and started working this year. Child rearing is done, and now I can do what I want. That's what I'm thinking right now. But there's just one problem. That's my relationship with William. William is not a good husband or father. In fact, it's hard to find anything good about him. He cheats, and he doesn't even give me a proper salary. I at least want you to give me enough money for living expenses. Huh? Don't get cocky when you're living off me. William always snaps back like this. I guess it's hopeless. Maybe divorce is the only option. Lately, I've been thinking about it more and more. But I can't just say I want a divorce easily. The reason is, my FIL Stephen, who is sick and hospitalized, asked me to take care of William. I owe Stephen, and as long as I can bear it, I have to endure it, don't I? I can't ignore Stephen's words, but my desire to divorce is strong. Caught between these conflicting feelings, I find myself reminiscing about the happier times before marriage. Ironically, that happiness began with a misfortune that befell my father. Our family ran a small restaurant. My father was in charge of cooking, and my mother managed the hall. Needless to say, the food was delicious. However, my father was incredibly bad at business. He started the restaurant with the desire to fill his customers' bellies with delicious food. That's a noble sentiment, I believe. But that sentiment alone drove his business. So, he hardly thought about profit. It didn't matter if the profit was small. As long as the customers were satisfied, that was enough for him. Obviously, this was no way to make a profit. As a result, our family's finances were always on the edge. Yet, seeing the satisfied customers, I felt proud, even as a child. So, I never interfered with my father's business. But during my college years, a crisis struck. The company supplying ingredients to my father's restaurant went bankrupt due to the recession. We had already paid for this month's supply, but now, we faced the prospect of closing the restaurant. Our management was already barely scraping by. There was no extra money to spare. Seeing my parents disheartened made me anxious too. But as a college student, there wasn't much I could do. Nor did it seem likely that the bankrupt company would refund us. The only option left for us was to close the restaurant. That's when a regular customer said, "Closing down? But the food is so good. What a waste." But the supplier has gone bankrupt, and we're likely to be saddled with debt. Then let me support you personally. Use it to revive the restaurant. The regular, true to his word, lent my father the money. We appreciate it. We'll definitely pay you back. Don't worry about the money for now. Just keep making delicious meals. After saying that, the man quickly left the restaurant. Later, my father started dealing with a different food company. The regular was apparently involved in a large-scale food distribution business, and we got our supplies at a cheaper rate than before. Fortuitously, our family's restaurant was saved from bankruptcy. About a year later, I went with my father to repay the money to the regular customer. While my father was talking to the man, a young man approached me. "So you borrowed money from my father?" It turned out, he was the son of the man who lent us the money. His name was William, and he worked in his father's company. "You're pretty. How about going out with me?" "Me, with you?" Come on, think of it as a way to say thanks for the loan. We were indeed saved by the loan, and my father had properly expressed our gratitude. I didn't think we owed anything more, but then William whispered to me, "I could spread rumors that the restaurant's daughter is ungrateful." That would be. I couldn't talk back. I thought it wouldn't affect me even if he spread rumors, but it could cause trouble for my father. And what would the restaurant's customers think? With these thoughts, I found myself unable to refuse William's offer. I didn't like it, but I decided to endure it, just this once. While pondering all this, I went out with William. But once we were out, it was more enjoyable than I expected. William was entertaining, knew various fun spots, and had a great taste in choosing places. Despite the terrible first impression, he might actually be a decent person. Thinking that was my mistake, I was swiftly wrapped around William's finger. Being with Susan is fun. I'm having fun too. With a nice girl like you, I'm thinking for the first time I could marry. Swept up by such simple words, I started dating William with a view of marriage. William continued to manipulate me in various ways. Eventually, a few years later, I found myself married to William. Of course, I never imagined then that it was all William's trap. He was kind and I felt loved by William. But it was all a lie. As soon as we got married, William showed his true colors. Here's this month's salary. Manage it well. Opening the envelope William handed me, I found a handwritten salary slip. The salary itself was deposited into the bank, so a slip alone wasn't odd. But it was strange that the salary slip was handwritten. Nowadays, handwritten documents are almost unheard of, but when I got married, it was 25 years ago. It was a time when computers were just beginning to become commonplace, and handwritten salary slips didn't seem out of place. There's more than $1,000, it seems enough. I muttered to myself, trying to be convinced. I managed somehow with that modest amount of money. As married life went on, I started to feel something was off. It was William's lifestyle. William left home at a fixed time every morning, but his return was always erratic. It varied daily. I'm busy with various tasks as my dad's successor. Then, at least let me know before you come home.
Stop nagging, I get it. I'll call.
William shouted. His attitude made me feel even more uneasy. Maybe he's out having fun. Perhaps there's someone else. Though I suspected, I couldn't confront him because I disliked being yelled at. In the end, I couldn't voice my doubts about William's behavior. Then Daniel was born. I thought things might change with a child. But William's attitude remained unchanged. Looking back, I think that's when it started. I began to vaguely consider divorce. And it was around the time Daniel started middle school. I received a call from my mother while I was out shopping for dinner.
What, Dad's hospitalized?
It was news that my father was admitted to the hospital. I rushed to the hospital. Mom's just making a big deal on the phone. My father said, laughing heartily. I was relieved. But at that moment, I remembered something and my heart skipped a beat. I made a mistake. I hadn't contacted William. By then, it was too late. My mobile phone was flooded with calls from William. Panicking, I called back, only to hear William's irritated voice.
Where the hell are you and what are you doing? Get back here and make my dinner. I'm sorry, Dad is... What? Dad? Your father?
William's tone was stern as he questioned me. I answered in a small voice. Yes, he was suddenly hospitalized.
Your father doesn't matter. You're my wife.
Startled by William's loud voice, I closed my eyes. I was terrified of his shouting, but I knew I had to stand up for myself. I gathered my courage and retorted. Is it wrong to be worried about my dad? That should be allowed, right?
Shut up. Don't talk back to me.
No, I will say this. You would rush to your own father, wouldn't you? William fell silent when I asked that. I thought it would hit close to home. But his reply was unimaginable.
Huh? I'd ignore it if my dad was hospitalized. After all, I wouldn't be troubled if he wasn't around.
I was speechless. That had to be a lie. But I couldn't deny it. After much hesitation, I told William. I'm different from you. Sorry, but you'll have to eat out tonight. That was all I could muster. I hung up the phone, still in a daze. Since that incident, I truly couldn't believe in William anymore. It was then I realized that the happy times before marriage were all an illusion.
Oh, I see. William didn't want a wife, he wanted a maid.
Saying it out loud made me sad. But I couldn't just dwell on the sadness. If I was going to divorce, I needed to prepare. I started preparing for a divorce. Years passed. And then Stephen was hospitalized. His condition was quite serious. He might not be able to leave the hospital. I relayed Stephen's medical condition to William, but he was unfazed.
Does that mean it's going to cost money?
It's not the time to worry about money, don't you understand?
I understand. I'll contact my brother Donald.
William reached out to Donald, my brother-in-law. Donald was married but had no children. So William asked if Donald could help with the hospital bills.
Can you pay? It's tough for us, with Daniel and Susan and all.
His attitude was as if it was someone else's problem. It reminded me of when my own father was hospitalized. It was clear he didn't care about Stephen at all. I couldn't bear it anymore. Enough.
I'll manage somehow and pay for Stephen's hospital bills. Don't forget what you just said.
William shouted. I nodded firmly. Ultimately, my declaration led to our family bearing the cost of Stephen's hospital bills. Moreover, Stephen stepped down from his position as president due to his illness. And William took over. Regardless, William didn't like that I had stood up to him. Since then, he started blatantly not coming home. Even when discussing Daniel's future plans. William ignored my calls and didn't come home. Dad's not coming home again today. I'm sorry, Daniel. I'm causing you trouble. It's fine, I don't care about Dad. More importantly, I want to go to college in Boston. That's right. Don't worry about tuition, I'll manage somehow. Soon after, Daniel's admission to a college in Boston was secured. As expected, William didn't see Daniel off. Once Daniel moved to Boston, the house became eerily quiet. By then, William's visits had dwindled to about once a week. There's also Stephen's hospital bills, could you transfer a little more?
What? I've already transferred more than half of my salary.
It should be enough for you now. The money William transferred was meager. It was clearly just a fraction of his salary. The claim of transferring more than half was undoubtedly a lie. I knew that. But I didn't have the energy to argue anymore. Years passed, and I got news that Daniel had landed a job. With Daniel employed, it might be time to bring up divorce. Over these years, I had prepared for divorce. Now, it's just about the right timing. Where and when can I bring it up to avoid arguments? Such thoughts kept haunting me. It's not about arguments, though. I chuckled wryly to myself. Then, one day, I had been visiting Stephen at the hospital. After chatting about trivial things, I headed back home as usual. As I tried to unlock the door, I was shocked. For some reason, the door was already open. Could it be a burglar? I cautiously peeked inside. From the living room, I could hear the TV and William's laughter. Relieved that William was home, I entered the living room. There, William was watching TV and laughing heartily. You're home.
Yeah, I was thinking of tidying up.
Tidying up? Heeding William's words, I looked around. On closer inspection, some items in the room were missing. It seems like something's missing. Yeah, I threw it away. Your stuff. My stuff? Stunned, I went back to my room. The room was silent, the computer, TV, even my favorite cup were gone. Not just that, the bed and everything else had disappeared.
What's the meaning of this?
I threw it out because we don't need it anymore.
Don't need it anymore? What are we supposed to do now?
As I raised my voice, William frowned. Then he averted his gaze and sighed. Frankly, I'm tired of supporting you.
What are you talking about? I'm your wife.
As I retorted, William grimaced and suddenly raised his voice.
Do I have to spell it out for you? Stop leeching off me.
For over 2 decades, I thought I was giving my all to William. Yet, this is how he sees me? I'm not leeching off you. I was just devoted to you. I thought that, but the words wouldn't come. As my strength drained away, William continued. Now that Daniel is working, you've got no reason to leech off me anymore.
But... Shut up! I don't want to hear your excuses.
William raised his voice. It's no use. My feelings never reached him. At that moment, I heard something snap inside me. It was the sound of the thread of love that had been connecting our hearts, snapping. At the same time, my feelings for William began to fade. Moments ago, we were a couple, but now we're like strangers. William had been using me all along. He never loved me. Otherwise, he wouldn't brazenly cheat and try to drive me out. I don't care what happens to such a man. The only option left is to completely crush him. Resolved, I looked up and faced William.
What? Got a complaint?
No. If you want me to leave, I will. I briskly closed the living room door behind me and headed to my room. But there was nothing of mine left. Not a single piece of my clothing remained. Don't bother looking. I had the garbage collection service take it all.
Which service?
There's a flyer here. That one. I picked up the service's flyer from the floor. As I dialed the number, I told William.
You'll regret this.
Leaving those words behind, I immediately left the house. The call connected right away. I explained the situation, and the person on the line understood immediately. It seemed William's actions had already raised suspicions. So, the garbage collection service had kept everything as it was. I'll be there right away. Thank you. I thanked them politely and ended the call. Afterward, I went to the service's place. After expressing my gratitude, I had my belongings moved to a newly rented storage unit. Relieved that my possessions were safe. I don't think getting away with something like this comes without a price. I clenched my teeth and called Daniel. After briefly explaining the situation, I ended with, So, I've decided to move out, considering a divorce. Daniel, please be prepared for that. All right? Got it. Bye. Daniel hung up. He seemed scared of me. Was I that angry? Puzzled, I put my mobile phone in my bag and headed to a nearby hotel. I already had a new place lined up. The reason was simple. I had been planning to discuss divorce with William soon. Divorce and move there. That was my plan for starting a new life. The schedule just moved up a bit. So honestly, I wasn't troubled. It's just that plans have moved forward by about 2 weeks. 2 weeks of hotel living. What a waste. A bad habit of a housewife, thinking about waste. I wonder if I should bill him for the hotel expenses.
Either way, be prepared, William.
I muttered and then started working on the post-divorce actions I had planned in advance. Around 10 days into my hotel stay, William called. He raised his voice as soon as I answered.
You took my money.
What are you talking about?
Don't play dumb. It's about Dad's hospital bills. The hospital just called asking for payment.
Oh, that. While thinking, I sighed and responded. You should pay it. It's no longer my concern after being kicked out.
I've been transferring living expenses to you. That's supposed to cover it.
Yes, but where's that bank account? Isn't it with you now? I retorted nonchalantly. But that account was empty. I couldn't help but laugh, knowing that.
There's an account, but it's empty. That's why I'm saying you took the money.
I haven't taken anything.
Don't lie. Who else could use it?
Didn't he realize how little he had transferred? I retorted, almost in disbelief. It was just too little to begin with. If there's no money for the hospital bills, why don't you use your allowance? Allowance? William started to panic, evidently thinking I didn't know. Since the beginning of our marriage, William had been giving me handwritten salary slips. That was to hide the fact that he was skimming part of his salary. In other words, the skimmed money was William's allowance. I asked Stephen once, how much is William's salary? So, what about it? He looked puzzled but told me. So, I know you've been taking money. When I confronted him, William fell silent. After a long pause, so long I thought the call had dropped, William suddenly raised his voice. What's wrong with me spending the money I earned? It's your fault for spending all the money I gave you. Uh-huh. And then? We're getting a divorce. I'll demand alimony. And you'll return the money you've squandered. William blurted that out, and I smiled triumphantly. I had caught him in his own words. Now William couldn't escape. I was smiling as I retorted to him. I appreciate that. I wanted a divorce too. Come over to discuss it. No, I want the divorce too. I'll be waiting with evidence of your infidelity. Though I couldn't see him, I imagined William's face turning pale. It was evident in his shaky voice. What infidelity evidence? Pretending won't help. I have photographic evidence. Photographic evidence? I could almost see William stuttering. Holding back laughter, I continued. I'll give you the address, so let's meet there next Sunday to talk in detail. I unilaterally gave him an address and hung up the phone. I had successfully confronted him with divorce. Now, if I could make him apologize. Honestly, that would be the hardest part. I braced myself for it. Then, on the agreed Sunday, I was at the meeting place well before the scheduled time. I think he should be arriving soon. I glanced around and soon saw William. Over here. I called out to William and he looked up in surprise. Here? Yes. I gave you the address, remember? No, but this place, whose mansion is it? William looked past me. There stood a mansion worth about $1 million. Much larger than an ordinary house, it boasted a vast garden. And was 3 stories high, complete with a home theater. Luxury cars were parked in the built-in garage. Pointing at the mansion, I smiled. This is my house. It's newly built, so it's pretty nice, right? Your house? Yes. I was planning to live here after the divorce, so I started building it a little while ago. Yes. The place I had summoned William to was my newly built house. Naturally, William, who had always seen me as just a housewife, was dumbfounded. Pushing such a William from behind, I entered the house. I led William to the living room. Shall we discuss then? This is my lawyer. I introduced my lawyer, who was waiting inside. But William was hardly in a state to pay attention. His gaze was unsettled, constantly scanning the surroundings. He didn't even try to look at the photos of his infidelity laid out on the table. He didn't respond when spoken to. Frankly, it was hardly a conversation. Eventually, William murmured in a low voice. How did you afford a house like this? Although I was amused by his curiosity, I answered. I bought it normally. Liar! A housewife can't afford something like this. To buy a $1 million house, one would need an annual income of around $150,000. However, I had that much income. So, I confidently replied. I earn that much. Do you have a problem with that? No, but how did you? I kind of helped out at a friend's company, and before I knew it, things turned out this way. The story goes back a few years. When I had decided to divorce due to the trouble over my father's hospitalization, I started preparing for it, beginning with finding a job. After the divorce, I couldn't survive without a job. So, I I started looking for a job that would allow me to live independently. But there weren't any good ones. That's when I consulted my best friend, Lisa.
Why don't you help me with my work?
What work do you do?
Aquaculture on land.
Land-based aquaculture involves artificially creating facilities like pools and breeding fish in them. Despite some disadvantages, it's an eco-friendly method that prevents marine pollution. Lisa's father started it, and now Lisa was taking it over. So, I started working there. William asked tentatively. Once I started helping out, the business suddenly began doing well. What I did was mainly negotiations and administrative work. But Lisa said I was a big help. And I was promoted to an executive position. It was all coincidental, but I believe luck is part of one's ability. Listening to my story, William looked downcast. After a moment of thought, he suddenly looked up. Let's forget the divorce talk. How about we start over? As he spoke, I looked at him coldly and replied. Stop joking. No, it's not a joke, I really want to start over with you. William only wanted my money. So, I raised an eyebrow and retorted. I dislike people who cheat. And those who neglect Stephen.
No, about Dad.
Quiet. You may not know, but I paid for your father's hospital bills. The money William had given me was indeed very little. After paying for groceries, high utility bills, and other miscellaneous expenses, nothing was left. That was all he ever gave. Naturally, there was no way it could cover Stephen's hospital bills. Initially, I managed somehow, but after starting my job, I paid the bills with my own salary. Despite that, you wouldn't listen to me, and you never visited Stephen.
That's because, well,
how can I trust someone like that? As I raised my voice, William looked down. Then, the lawyer proceeded with the discussion about alimony. William was speechless. He remained silent and downcast until the end. Urged by the lawyer, William eventually signed the divorce papers. The alimony was set at $30,000. Now that we are divorced, you'll be responsible for your father's hospital bills. Understood. William nodded reluctantly. At least he didn't argue. I was relieved. Finally, I made sure William left, practically chasing him out. It was over at last. The only regret was that I didn't get an apology from William, but I had one last move. That would make him apologize. I couldn't help but smile at the thought. A few days later, after visiting the company, I was called from behind on my way home.
Hey, Susan!
I turned around to see William. Don't call me like we're familiar. We're divorced now.
Shut up! What the hell did you do?
William was looking at me with a flushed face. I realized what this was about. Ah, so that was the talk at the company. With that in mind, I said to him with a smile. What do you think I did?
Don't mess with me. Tell me how you got me fired.
William's outburst was amusing, and I couldn't help but smile. It's your responsibility. You got fired as a consequence for having an affair with the company's clerk. William's affair was with a clerk at his own company. He had been doing as he pleased, thinking he was untouchable as the president. After the divorce was settled, I reported the affair to Stephen. Stephen was furious about William's actions, while also saddened by our divorce. I showed Stephen the evidence photos of the affair, which enraged him further. Then, Stephen made an unexpected offer. I'm going to transfer all my company shares to you, Susan. To me? Wouldn't Donald? No, I want to give them to you. Use them to dethrone William from his position. Stephen explained the situation. His company was a corporation, requiring shareholder meetings or board resolutions for key decisions. Of course, decisions can also be made through board resolutions. However, it wasn't a large company. Stephen owned most of the issued shares. This meant he could make decisions as a single shareholder. In smaller companies, it's common for the president to own the majority of shares. So, by inheriting Stephen's shares, I could exercise voting rights on my own. But it wasn't me who decided to fire William. I informed Donald about acquiring the shares. And just reported William's affair. The rest was Donald's decision. Donald was considerate.
That guy. Why is he doing what you say?
It's not about doing what I say. He made the decision for the company's best interest. Hearing this, William collapsed on the spot. Then he began to plead, clinging desperately.
I was wrong. I apologize, please forgive me. Without a job, I'll be on the streets.
But that's not my concern. It's all his responsibility. I won't forgive you even if you apologize.
Please, I'm begging you. Forgive me.
William repeatedly offered deep apologies right there. I turned away. I'm sorry, but there's nothing I can do.
Why not? If you have the shares.
I sold them to Donald and his wife. I don't want anything to do with you anymore. At that moment, I heard William's loud voice. Of course, I pretended not to hear and walked away. After being ousted as the president, William had to leave the company. He might have stayed if he were an employee, but William had joined the company through Stephen's connections and had always been arrogant.
I'd never be just an employee.
He used to boast. So, as soon as he was removed from his position, he was kicked out. Now he's working a part-time job at a grocery store, but re-employment at his age will be difficult. He's likely to spend his later years in poverty, filled with intense regret. As for me, after the divorce, I became more dedicated to my work. While I don't think I'll remarry, I have several male colleagues. Spring might come again. It was then when I had these thoughts. I received a call from Daniel.
I'm bringing my girlfriend over next time.
That's wonderful.
I'm looking forward to it.
I failed in my marriage, but I don't want Daniel to experience the same. But he'll be fine. Daniel is much more sensible than I was.